important for us to keep kind of a head count of the number of people who attend these. So please make sure you sign in. We have one downstairs here in the hallway, and we have one upstairs in the front entrance. So not a big deal. Nobody's coming after you if you forgot to sign in. But please make sure that on your way out, at least, you're able to do that. We do encourage you to become a museum member. And if you are interested in that at the end of the presentation today, we're always looking for new membership. We're always looking for new volunteers, people to become involved with the museum. And I would have you talk to our president over here, John Petacolis. Once again, donations. You notice we have the donation jars around various spots in the museum. That really helps us out. So anything that you can contribute, and of course, some of those jars we have labeled by the branch of service for you veterans if you want to go ahead and put money in your branch in that jar, or if you want to mess with like one of the other branches and put a couple of pennies in there, you know, I don't know. It's up to you. But all righty. Upcoming coffee and conversation talks. We are continuing our focus on individual stories from the Vietnam War. And as you know, back in March 22nd, we had a wonderful symposium here in Broomfield where we had a lot of speakers who told stories about their service during the Vietnam conflict. We do have a couple of more speakers coming up. May 24th, Paul Strange, a Vietnam War veteran who served in the 4th Infantry Division and was involved in the incursion in Cambodia, which some of you know was very controversial during the war. And today, actually, in the audience, and on June 14th, he will be presenting, is Peter Lagasse. And Peter, where are you again? Right here. I have Peter stand up here. Peter will be telling us about a real important role that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers played during the Vietnam conflict, and that was creating these harbors and port facilities. And these were essential for, of course, bringing in logistics, supplies, manpower, all of this kind of equipment that was needed to fight that war for that period. So we are looking forward to Peter's talk on June 14th, Paul's talk on May 24th. We have some other talks coming up throughout June, July, and August. In August, we will be kind of taking a break from the Vietnam War focus, and we'll be taking a look at the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, with the dropping of the atomic bomb, victory in Japan Day, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. A couple of things just to let you know about. May is Military Appreciation Month. Broomfield, the city of Broomfield, has told us that that is what this month is to be dedicated to. We think that's a wonderful observance. Monday, May 26th, the museum will be involved in the picnic and celebration in Broomfield County Commons Park from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. to observe Memorial Day. We've done this, how many years have we done this, John? Many, many years. And it is a wonderful observation of Memorial Day. I really highly suggest people be there. We'll have speakers, there'll be music, there'll be food, there'll be all kinds of things going on. So with that, I'd like to have our president, John Petacolis, come up here and tell us a little bit more about what's going on during Military Appreciation Month.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm John Petacolis. I'm the current president of the Museum Foundation, or Museum Board. We also, on Memorial Day, are going to have a flyby. So we have a couple RV-4s, or 4 RV-4s that will be doing flyby as long as we have good weather. So we'll plan on that. As Don mentioned, it is Military Appreciation Month. We recently received a proclamation from the city of and county of Broomfield, and nicely written. It's up in the front office, declaring May as Military Appreciation Month and honoring the Veterans Museum. Also, the Veteran Museum was just recently honored with the Heart of Broomfield Award. So that's been in the paper, I think. You've probably noticed it, or if you read the Enterprise. And there's a QR code up in the front office, I believe, that you can click on, and it'll give you all the information on the Heart of Broomfield Awards. We're going to be in a award ceremony on the 30th of May. It's a breakfast award ceremony, and they will present us with the Heart of Broomfield Award. Also, we mentioned Memorial Day, and there's also a lunch. The city and county of Broomfield are putting on a lunch for veterans on the 23rd of May at the community center, and I'm not sure exactly how many seats are left in that, but if you're a veteran, it's supposed to be free for veterans, and it's a nice lunch that they put on. So that is going on. And then today we're going to have support, I guess you would call them vendors, but they're going to be military support groups at the end of this gathering, this speaking engagement by Gary. We're going to have these tables set up on the front lawn. It's put on by the city. They've invited a lot of military support groups to make presentations or to have material up there to hand out. I'm on the impression that there's also going to be a miniature horse up there. That miniature horse is involved with veteran therapy for those that have PTSD. And so that's going to be up as kind of a demonstration up on the front lawn. So again, welcome to the museum. If you haven't been through the museum, please do at the end of this talk. Please go up and tour the museum. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you very much.
And speaking about the museum too, we have a wonderful exhibit on the Vietnam War that some of you may have had the chance to see. If you have not had the opportunity, highly suggest you come up and take a peek at it. Flint Whitlock over here, another member of our board, would like to talk a little bit about that exhibit. A lot of that, I would say almost all of it, was his brainchild. So he has done a wonderful job, and I think you all would appreciate it once you look at it.
Thank you, Don. No, it wasn't my brainchild. It was a group effort, you might say, a team effort by the museum. And well, I was the captain of the unit here. This is a younger version of me. It was taken about 2 weeks ago, right after we set up the exhibit. Yeah. But if you haven't had a chance yet to see the exhibit, please do. And then Char's husband, Noah, has a wonderful exhibit of paintings. Noah is a Vietnam graduate, as I like to call those of us who were there. And he was a wonderful artist. And we've got, what, about 10 paintings of his up there of scenes that he painted based on his Vietnam experiences. So hopefully you will have some time to get up there and go through the museum if you haven't been through the museum, or at least the new Vietnam exhibit. And I was under the impression that we were going to have a miniature cavalryman to go on the miniature horse. But I think there are volunteers in the back. There are a couple of volunteers back there. Wonderful. So without further ado, I'll turn it back to Don.
All right, thanks, Flint. Okay, so let's go ahead and let me make a little change here, and we will have Gary up and sharing his story with us. All right, can everybody see that? Do we need to maybe dim the lights a tiny bit, or are we okay, Bob? You think we're okay? Maybe dim them a little bit. All right. Okay. Hey, Gary, make sure you're on. Good, you're on. There's your pointer. All right, folks, then Gary Tobey, as I mentioned before, a lieutenant in the United States Navy flying attack aircraft, these A-4 attack aircraft that were flying off the USS Enterprise during the Vietnam War. I did a tiny bit of research before this because the A-4 was an aircraft I was not familiar with in the military from my time period, but they were very nimble, sleek little aircraft, and my understanding is that they were even using them during Top Gun as aggressors. In other words, they were playing the part of the enemy for those, you guys have seen the Top Gun with, Tom Cruise and all that kind of stuff. So they needed somebody to play the part of the enemy. They needed an aircraft that I guess kind of modeled some of the characteristics of some of the MiGs that the, other powers were using, we should say, like Vietnam and Korea and China and Russia. And so they utilized the A-4, and I think it's still being used. If I'm not sure in that role. I know some other nations still use it, but that means it's had a very long lifespan.
Yeah, I think a contractor still has them, and they wax F-16s.
Yeah. I wouldn't doubt that. Anyway, without any further ado, I'll let Gary take over from here. Go ahead, Gary.
Thank you much. And I should give a plug. First of all, I have a very extensive speech here that I hope I'll be able to get it in 2 hours. And as you can see, I've got some show and tell. The one thing I do want to say, I just read No Silent Night that Don is the co-author of. Great book if you have any interest in history about the Battle of Bastogne, the Battle of the Bulge during World War II. That is extensive. He said only 5 years. Well, it looked like more than 5 years of research. But if you want to get both the German and the American view of the Battle of Bastogne, look at Don's book, No Silent Night. Okay. Well, he didn't even pay me to do that. I thought, but I did read the book, which I don't always do. But I did read the book. Speaking of that, you can see I've got a little show and tell up here. And we'll leave some of it up here. You may or may not know that when a carrier goes on a cruise, they actually have a cruise book. So I got a couple cruise books up here, and usually what it shows is Go-Go Girls or something like that, according to whatever the cruise book crew thought was a good idea to have in the book. And the other thing I have, we mentioned Top Gun. Turned out that the A-4, if you took off some of the bomb racks and so forth, it could outmaneuver almost everything in the sky. Maybe not the MiG-17 if you had good pilots in the MiG-17 and the A-4, but Dan Pedersen. I'm going to talk about different kinds of airplanes. Dan Pedersen was an F-4 Phantom pilot in my air wing, and I'll tell you why he created Top Gun during the course of this. Other people that I knew, A6 pilot, Red McDaniel, he wrote this little book, Scars and Stripes. Red was in the ready room right across the passageway from me, right across the hall from me. He got shot down and was a long time in the Hanoi Hilton. More on that probably later. Other thing, and then his wife, Dorothy, they both live in Alexandria. The last I knew, I was there a few years ago, met them. After the hero's welcome. Often the wives had a tougher job than the guys. Another guy I went through flight training with was Charlie Plum. You may remember we had these bracelets during the Vietnam War. That's Charlie's. And then here you have my handy dandy gloves. This is the smallest weapon I ever used. It's a 20 millimeter cannon. We finally figured out a 50 caliber was not big enough to actually do damage in certain circumstances, so we ended up with a 20 millimeter. I had 2 of those on my A4. And this is my wonderful helmet, which got modified so that I could even go at night and in bad weather, which was really a bad idea. I wish they hadn't figured it out. But I had both that and this. In case you wonder about gadgets, well, they make some gadgets. This helmet, the original helmet, was probably from the Korean War. It weighs about 100 pounds. They made them lighter later, but I got issued that in 1964 and wore it for 6 years. Over here, you may wonder about the very sophisticated survival kit. Some of you people see these great big packs. if you'll see the A4 cockpit a little bit. You wonder, what could you put in an A4 cockpit? This is it. That, and actually you couldn't even have anything in your pockets for the most part. Important things, the most important was a radio, survival radio. So if you ejected and you were in all of my flights were over North Vietnam, except for the Tet Offensive, I went south to protect the Marines at Khe Sanh. I didn't protect them at all. They had a lot of stuff going on. And you can see that you have a little room for things, and these are 38 rounds. My real weapon was a little 22 that I had in here. If I bailed out over North Vietnam, I was going to sneak through the dogs and the North Vietnamese troops and go over to Laos. And I had a little 22 in here to shoot birds to eat. I actually had the Navy issued us a little 38 with a, I could probably hit somebody at about this range. The 22 was a more useful kind of weapon. Then you had special things like a tourniquet. You might wonder what would one guy do with a tourniquet? One guy had an arm blown, an A4 pilot had an arm blown off, and he put his tourniquet on. So you could, some people in the field know about tourniquets. You got to put them on high and tight, and he did. He had to bail out because he couldn't actually fly his airplane back to the ship, but he bailed out, and he actually used the tourniquet. And then I was going to camp out, so I had a little poncho in the back here. Not everybody dared to have that much in the cockpit with them. You have to kind of be a little careful of any extra stuff in a cockpit. Here I have various kinds of shirts. The one I liked the best, I had temporary duty for a while, and I was the comm officer on the USS Independence. Now I thought that was if you ever saw a flight deck, you see yellow shirts of the guys kind of think they're directing something out there. Often they are. Now you wonder, what is a comm officer? Who is an old carrier guy here? I'm going to go through that in a minute. Catapults, arresting gear, light maintenance. That's what that is. So for temporary duty, I went and I was aboard a ship for a little while before flight school, the USS Independence, and I was the assistant comm officer. They wouldn't allow me to really do anything there, getting away. And then, you've seen the classic, and we got a couple of them here in the audience. The classic jacket is the world famous leather jacket. I think it's goat skin, as I recall, something like that. This one was made the same year I was. It's dated 1942, and that's when I was born. And usually we put something on like this, and this said my rank at various times. These are specially designed to keep you hot in the summer and cold in the winter. And then you may have seen, and I only bring this because one of my daughters kind of wore it out. This is not really the jacket it was on, but we put all these little signs on it, and the one that I noticed in the background on the Enterprise was, if you were a Tonkin Gulf Yacht Club guy. Now, obviously, I was there a couple of times, so I got a hash mark. And then if you made a few carrier landings, you could get a little handy-dandy thing that said, I've got 100 landings or I got 200 landings. So I got a couple hundred on the Enterprise. And the orange didn't come, that was something my daughter picked out later. And then what did we really use for jackets? I wear this all the time now. This is a poopy suit liner. The poopy suit is a dry suit if you're over cold water, which you're always over cold water, and you could wear a poopy suit which would keep you alive another 40 seconds before your hands went totally numb. And this was the liner inside, and there were pants for it. But this thing really worked. Why? It's got two big pockets and no other fiddly diddly things. Just that's it, And it's not. It keeps you warm in the winter and colder in the summer. One of those things you got to know. Let me ask, how many people here are Vietnam War veterans? I thought there might be a few. How many are U.S. Navy one time or another? Now, those are the real tough guys, you know, because some of them were not aboard a big floating hotel like the nice USS Enterprise. It's always good, and John, where's John? He's actually, there, John's back there. He has to keep me honest, which is very hard. That'll be very difficult, John, but because he actually flew the A-4 and the A-6, which I flew with all the time. He did not fly the Phantom, which was a fighter type aircraft. Both the A-4 and the A-6 are attack. That's air to ground. So we're going to drop bombs, fire rockets. In my case, fire missiles against surface-to-air missile sites. That's really good duty. They have a very simple system. If you fly a mission or two and you survive, you become an Iron Hand specialist. That means you're going to go and kill missile sites for the duration. As you might or might not expect, when surface-to-air missiles are coming to blow you out of the sky, which unfortunately they did on a regular basis, we had a missile. I usually carried two, and I would fire a missile to hit them, blow their radars away, and they were in a surface-to-air missile site, so it would blow most of those people away. That's probably the one time I killed Russians, is because in the early days, probably the Russians were actually manning some of the surface-to-air missile sites. They were smarter about that war than we were. They just did it as advisors, and we're not there much. I think that the big message you have with all war is it's very bad business, not good business for those right in it, and that's almost always the case. When I think of the trench warfare in Ukraine, it's just beyond belief. You know, some of you guys who were around digging foxholes, not good work if you can help it. That is for sure. And then the whole question is, what did you know anything about where you were going when you got in the Navy? I got in the Navy, I got in regular Navy ROTC, University of Rochester, went through 4 years. The good thing about the midshipman program, then I was right with Annapolis guys here and there, you got to see different parts of the Navy. So in my first cruise, I was aboard the USS Essex out of Quonset Point, Rhode Island, anti-submarine carrier. Big history, can't go through it today. Well, it was oldest and boldest of the Essex-class carriers from World War II. That was how old it was. And I went out on 1961, just after they brought back stacks of bodies from the Bay of Pigs abortive invasion. Then in the next summer, I went half the time to Corpus Christi, Texas to get sucked into flying, and then the other half to Little Creek, Virginia, where I learned I didn't want to be a SEAL or a recon Marine. You know, that's a good part of your education is what would you like to do and what would you like not to do. And at that point, sometimes I even went aboard an old stinky diesel sub or something and said, I don't want to do this either, so decided not to. Last cruise as a midshipman, got aboard a destroyer, which is a smaller ship, a lot smaller, and it moves all the time, never stays stable, even in port, I don't think. Destroyer sailors, you can almost always tell them. It looks like they've had one or two, because that ship moves at all times. Went aboard 1963, went across the Atlantic to the Med, had a flotilla of destroyers, first time since World War II. Went to the Mediterranean, had to go and visit all these terrible places like Cannes, France, and Mytilene, Greece, and places like that. Terrible thing. Anyway, and so then, while I was in the ROTC unit, I got my private pilot's license at the end of my senior year, and then I went to the Independence as a comm officer for a while. And then I went to flight training. And flight training in the Navy, I went in August of 1964, Pensacola, Florida, of course. And basically, of the likely aviators coming in, we were just spliced in with the Annapolis folks again. Sometimes they were with us on midshipman cruises. So that's how you get trained up. You go for a while at Pensacola, get basic training, T-34 Mentor, kind of like a Beechcraft and Bonanza, except the seating is a little different arrangement that we had. Then I went to T2 Buckeyes at the wonderful station Meridian, Mississippi. That's one of those seaports a lot like Broomfield, the world-famous seaport of Meridian, Mississippi. And in T2, you learn instruments, formation flying, things like that. Then we went back to Pensacola for carrier qualification. First time you ever get to go aboard a carrier, which is always a thrill. Air-to-air gunnery. Then went to advanced training at the F-9 Cougar, Kingsville, Texas, and learned more about bombing, long-range navigation, and so forth. Okay, that's how I started. Now we get to this. We probably should get to that sometime. And by the way, if you have questions, just throw something at me. Steve knows he can throw rolls or pancakes or whatever from the back row and get me. But just raise your hand. I'll be glad to address those. And this takes a while, I'm told. Okay.
Hey, turn, make sure it's on.
Here comes support.
I'm sorry. Tech support, turn on the ON/OFF switch.
Goodness.
Well, this is our favorite slide. We're going to leave it right there.
We'll at least get you to that while I figure this out.
You may, let's back up there. Yeah, this is, in case you wonder what home looks like, this is what home looked like for a couple of years for me. That is the mighty USS Enterprise, the first nuclear carrier in the world. Probably the day it was retired, it was still the fastest ship on the sea. It had 8 nuclear reactors, and the only trouble was you had to then go through drive shafts and bearings and screws, and so when it really wound up to go fast, even though it's 80,000 tons, it was jumping up and down. And you can see that was the air wing. That was the real live air wing that I flew with for a couple of years. Not sure how this is going to work. My airplanes are these wonderful little A4s right here. This is an F4. You can see it's bigger. The A4 really was a miraculous airplane in many ways. It was designed by Ed Heinemann of Douglas Aircraft. The spec said it's got to come in under 30,000 pounds and it's got to be the fastest thing going. He came in basically under 15,000 pounds, and it was very fast, very little, hard to see, and served, as we said, right up till the present for one reason or another. Costing 5 times as much was an F4 Phantom, and it weighed about twice or 3 times as much. And when you're aboard a carrier, you got to get them on and off the carrier. Then let me see if I can even see. RA-5 Vigilante, that was our photo bird. Some of the air traffic controllers were in the E-2 Hawkeyes. And then we had helicopters. And tankers, the A-3 tanker. Yes.
A7s?
Pardon?
A7s?
No A7s at that time. They were just coming out and having split tails and getting shot down way too much. So we A4s were glad not to be in the initial thing. John knows I instructed in the A7 for a couple of years later. That was a follow-on attack aircraft. About 80 aircraft. Usual ops tempo was launch about half the air wing every hour and a half. Launch, recover, refuel, rearm, launch, recover, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. That was what we were doing. The thing about, the Enterprise is remarkable because it has this big, boxy, no other carrier in the world has ever had that. We thought it was something to do with electronic countermeasures, but nobody ever would dare tell us. I suspect it didn't work, so they didn't do anything. A lot of things in all kinds of places, you try it and it doesn't work, and you finally say
We
no.
modified it about 10 years later, you know, that big boxy island was modified to a more conventional.
Okay, yeah, and
Pretty good verbal behind the ship when you landed.
yeah, as you imagine, carriers get to go fast, so airplanes coming in don't have to go quite as fast coming in. And this gets to be a little technical, as you might imagine. But when the ship is going fast, guess what's happening behind it? Burble. And guess where I'm landing? We're right there. And so if you thought you had a good, stable approach, well, not so much. And little airplanes like the A-4, very touchy. It had a great roll rate, which meant it rolled all the time. You know, it's kind of like that destroyer. You had to fly it. And we did. They were all hand flown at that time. You may know that there's a whole. They don't even trust pilots to bring aircraft aboard anymore. But it was back in the old days where they actually thought maybe some of those young kids could get it back aboard one way or another. And as you see, I made it back 200 times. It's always better to get back aboard the ship than go in the water or stop off in North Vietnam. The A-6s, which John also flew, carried about twice as much bomb load as we did. The Phantoms, they couldn't hit anything. Most of the time, like the Air Force, they actually hit the ground. But beyond that, you weren't sure where the Phantoms were going to drop their bombs. A-4s, on the other hand, generally had a lot of training, and I've been in a couple of places where people were bombing the wrong place. One time, just north of the DMZ, we had a FAC up there that was getting shot at. Well, it's uncomfortable because they're in little tiny airplanes, and we showed up and there were guys bombing this place, and then I rolled in. I was wingman, rolled in, and as I'm going in, I see this blinking light over here. That's called an anti-aircraft gun, probably a 57 millimeter. And so we're bombing the wrong place. It was a hazy day. You know, I think some of those guys were Air Force, so they couldn't see where they were. But then, you know, being an old A-4 pilot, I said, that's not a friendly thing down there, that anti-aircraft gun. So I pulled off, which you don't want to do too much, and then I just took it out, which, you know, I'm sure the FAC went wild. He was very happy that somebody was there, actually saw what he was worried about, and took it out. So that happens sometimes. The A-6, though, had a very difficult mission. We went basically visual. We went at night, but I'll talk more about that a little bit if the hook doesn't get me before. But the A-6 had the mission, and they were in the ready room right across from me. Basically going up the Red River, and I'm going to have to start showing where some of these things are soon. Low, basically about 200 feet. Luckily, there weren't any big lumps. There were some they had to be careful of. And then they drop a heck of a load of bombs on something, basically in the Haiphong, Hanoi area. Now, I guess I got to get oriented here. What did we do during our war? There was no such thing as a bridge that was up in North Vietnam. We took out all the bridges. We were just interdicting, keeping the trucks. We couldn't bomb them in Haiphong Harbor. We had to wait till they got out in the trees and hidden, and then we tried to bomb them. But we took out all the bridges, and and bombed the roads. We dropped bombs that didn't go off. They were really mines, so that when somebody brought something like a rifle by, then they went off. We had surprises everywhere. And you may wonder if I was actually ever in an airplane. And you got to know, some of these photos, they're half frame 35 millimeter that either I took or somebody else took. They're fuzzy. They're not very good. But you can see here, this is my very roomy cockpit. When that canopy went down, my helmet was right here. I could not reach back to get the radios on this side. I had to cross hand and get the radios because there wasn't any room for my elbow to go back. Ed Heinemann had thought of everything except putting a pilot in there. But once you put it on, it's kind of like a sports car. Once you put it on, you were part of it and it was part of you. And you can see, this is the 20 millimeter cannon. I had one on this side and one on the other. And remember I mentioned those Go-Go-Go's in San Francisco? My crew had put on there Scooter a Go-Go. One of the names for the A-4 was a scooter. And so that's what they had done that. And you can see that having an aircraft aboard ship, they've got to use all this, what is it, zinc chromate, to keep the thing from just totally rusting down and falling apart as you're flying. And then if you actually use your cannon, it really ruins the surface. I don't know why that is. And this thing here is actually the refueling probe. Back behind here, you see an A6. And what it had to do, it had to fold its wings to be aboard the USS Enterprise. The A-4 Skyhawk only had a 30-foot wingspan. It's the only, I think it's probably the only Navy aircraft that did not have to fold its wings. That also reduced the weight of it. Heinemann was a brilliant guy in many respects. And this is the Grand Attack Squadron 56. Remember I said, well, there are about 6,000 men aboard this ship. And it came down to 2 A-4 squadrons, 1 A-6 squadron, 2 F-4 squadrons, and some detachments of other airplanes. So not a lot of guys actually were flying. It turns out that you're kind of, somebody's called it the point of the spear. A few guys get to go do it. And these are a big selection of different people. The ones, well, he was a duty officer that day. You try to pick out which ones are going to be the admirals, you'd never guess. Most of these guys right here are, that's my skipper, C. Ray Smith, obviously Annapolis. He said, boy, if you bring your airplane back, I'll bring you back. I said, oh, good. That sounds like a heck of a deal, skipper. I think I'll do. But C. Ray was a good guy. Yes?
Gary, just a quick question. So some of those other pilots, was there like an A team and then there was like a B team? There was like reserve pilots? Is that what you mean?
No, no, no. All of us flew in a regular rotation. All of us flew.
25 of them?
Yeah. That's it. That's what a squadron was.
You did have a few ground pounders, maintenance guys.
Yeah.
That are probably included in that.
Yeah, they are. Right here's Vince Fragamini. He's the reason I'm probably in Denver, because he went through photo school, air intelligence officer. Jack Jr. Kaufman from Ozark, by God, Missouri. Jack was what we called a limited duty officer. He was an ordnance guy, knew everything about bombs and fuses and stuff. And he was an ensign like I was. Well, I was a JG probably. Military. Ensign, if you're a naval officer, you're an ensign, then you're a lieutenant junior grade, then you're a lieutenant. That's as far as I got in the Navy. Then you're lieutenant commander, then you're commander. The squadron commander and skipper and XO, executive officer, they're commanders. Everybody else is lieutenant commander, lieutenant, and all of the JGs back in here. Yeah, a couple of, another maintenance officer, a couple of maintenance officers who basically maintained our aircraft. I also was division officer and had the largest division on my second cruise. They take care of the airframes, the engines, and the survival stuff, the seats and the air conditioning. We had wonderful air conditioning. Ed Heineman did remember that. Kind of pleased about that. But this is kind of what our old airplanes look like. I mentioned that first strike. That wasn't my first strike, but L.D. Nagel was my lead on that one where we couldn't figure out where the bombs were supposed to go for that poor fact just north of the DMZ. Rarely went down that far south. This is what we delivered daily. Basically, our bombs, 250 pounders, that's probably what these are, 500 pounds, 1,000 pounds, 2,000 pounds. And these are the new modern, sleek, they don't have quite as much aerodynamic drag as the old World War II type bombs, which I will show you one of. And this shows the good old A-4 VA-56, and I think this probably is my picture, one of those wonderful half-frame 35 millimeters. You never knew what you got. Remember the old days? You took a picture, you had no clue what you got. You had to send it off, and when it came back, you said, whoa, I didn't like any of those. Okay. But that was our job, and you can see if you get a fire going or a rocket goes off, which it did the year after I was aboard the Enterprise, somebody asked, I think we lost about 125 guys because bombs going off on carriers are not a good idea. And this is kind of what we look like. And there were different configurations. These are fuel tanks on the A4. This is what a pilot looked like when he's getting ready to tuck himself into that fine machine. Generally, we were carrying at that point, there are different kinds of ejection racks that you tie bombs on, have little clips on them, and when you pickle them, they're all super timing, millisecond timing. And so you could drop, and this is probably a TER, a TER, which is a triple ejection rack. We had a MER, which was 6 bombs, and that's what the A6s generally had. When I had a 3 bomber, they had a 6 bomber. And then sometimes you might put 3 250s on here and then 1 500 outboard or something like that. And you'll see another configuration or two. But that's kind of what we look like getting ready to go. Wonderful little airplane, as I've said.
Gary, can I ask a question?
Sure.
What does the NG on the tail stand for?
Well, very simple. Pacific, the G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Every time an air wing got formed, and this was Air Wing 9 at that time, okay, you bring all these squadrons together I've mentioned. That just happens to be, if you're on the Atlantic, it'll be an A. And so if you have an N, don't ask me why N's for Pacific, but it is. And then G is just, it just shows the air wing.
Okay.
And so if you went over to the constellation or whatever, it would be November something else. And so if you land aboard the wrong carrier, well, they know right away you're lost. And that's the whole thing. If you ever land aboard the wrong carrier, the paint crew will fix your airplane so that when you take it back to your own carrier, they'll know where you went.
How often does that happen?
Not very often. And in Vietnam, that probably never happened. Sometimes we had to, if the deck was foul, if you had a big problem aboard the deck, you might have to go to another carrier. But that was okay. But if you just went to the wrong carrier, then you got a paint job on your airplane. Whoa. What did I just do? These are ordnancemen. I told you Jack Jr. Kaufman was in charge of these guys. He had to be a rough, tough guy, because look at this. Now, the Air Force had these lifting machines and so forth. These are the lifting machines I had. And that is, that's probably a 1,000-pound bomb that they're playing with there. How would you like to just do that all day long?
Those guys get real muscles.
Yeah.
Our guys had to have their utilities, the marine utilities, cut because their muscles were so big.
Yeah. I mean, if you did that all day long, 12 hours on, 12 hours off, and you did get fed, so you could get going. And this is Jack Jr. Kaufman at work, and a young officer whose name I'm forgetting right now, who he was trying to train to be an ordnance officer. But you know, that's what you do day in and day out. And then you start it up. And this thing, we did not have starters. Part of the light aircraft, there was no starter. And that wasn't the only airplane. A lot of Navy airplanes at that time did not have starters. So you had to give a little jet to put some hot air in the big jet or bigger jet to get it started. So that's what you do. And this guy down here is saying, "Okay, wake up! You're about to go somewhere. We got the huffer hooked up to you, so we're going to get you going." And this is just a selection of aircraft. This is the A-4F. It has the humpback. I never flew that one, and this was one of the first ones I'd ever seen. Just came aboard for some reason to show off, I guess. This is an A6. You can tell that is really a very beautiful airplane. It's an ugly airplane, but on the other hand, it does the job. It was the best all-weather bomber in its time. It also was the best electronic warfare aircraft forever. I mean, they just retired those a little while ago. Electronic warfare has to do with jamming the other guy's radars and listening and figuring things out about various kinds of attack radars and other stuff. And this is what we always liked. It's the old A-3 Sky Warrior. It originally was a bomber, but it was our tanker, our in-flight tanker. Now the F-4 guys, they almost had to live on those things because they ran out of gas in a minute. When they launched and had to tank. And if they went into burner in a real fight, they had 10 minutes of fuel. Then they were going to have to go home. So a lot of things were not designed. Well, the MiGs were the same way. They ran out of gas in a hurry. Which is a good thing that they run out of gas, not so good that the Phantoms did. And that's the A-4 launching. Remember I told you I was in the cats and arresting gear? This is the catapult, and you can see the steam, but that's not leaking, it's just sort of leaking. The way you get fired from a carrier is this catapult. It's a big tube under the deck. We had 4 of them. And you hook your little airplane to it. You put a ton of steam in of the right amount for your weight of aircraft, and it yanks you and it breaks a little holdback thing, and you go down. Basically in, about 450 feet, you go from 0 to, let's call it 180 miles an hour. So it's a bit of a launch. And you're just along for the ride for that, and you're kind of watching and listening for things, but you're not much in control. If you got some problem or whatever, you basically need to eject if you got a problem. So your discretion at night, you see nothing. You're in the black, basically very low light. When you turn your lights on, the CAT officer says go. And then the next thing you're going to have is black up here, black down here. Up here you're alive, down here you're dead. You're trying to remember which way it is. The only thing of any interest is your instruments. Nothing outside of any interest for a long time. So you have to be instantly ready to go. Because once the CAT officer says bye, you're going. When I saw those guys going in to hit the Houthis, I thought, night cat shots, those guys are going off to shoot and be shot at. Glad I'm not there. And then this is another one of those famous pictures I mentioned with my half frame. That's a whole bunch of A4s going into basically probably into the Haiphong area, if I had to guess. Sometimes you just went in 2s or 4s for road reconnaissance or specially designated targets. If you're going on a big target, you might have 40 aircraft.
Gary, what would you say the percentage of night missions versus day missions were for you?
For me, it was probably only about 25% because I had to see. The A6s, they went every night, no matter what. And the night missions, there are small carriers and big carriers. My carrier was a big carrier. That's a good thing, except the Enterprise got to fly bad weather and night. And so even though I was flying an A4, I got to fly bad weather and night. You go, well, okay. But generally, except for the A6s, we were not going to be very effective at night. And it's not good to go at night because you can see things shooting at you. And if you've ever had stuff floating up, it kind of floats up at you at night, and you go, oh, I hope that the next one doesn't float right here. Those rounds are red hot coming out of the 57, 37, 85 millimeter. And so when you go and they put those guns in very awkward places. It's where my target's supposed to be, you know. And but you do learn. In the daytime, you know exactly, by photo reconnaissance, I knew where the likely gun sites were, and I knew to come in out of the sun, come up over the back and through them. The average, the way we bombed, it's kind of like the Stukas did in World War II. We just put your nose down, basically a 45-degree dive, and you start at, I'll just call it 11,000 feet, we probably were most of the time. That's kind of 2 miles up eyeball. Roll in. By the time you're at your pickle point, you're at 5,000 feet. You're going 500 knots, which is a good thing to be doing fast. You drop your bombs, pull off, and you do not drive. Luckily, I never could fly straight and level, so you know when I would pull off, I was very careful to never go in any predictable way. You know, but you're down at that point. You're down at 1,000 feet, and you're being shot at by everything. You know, guys throwing nuts and bolts up to get you, and you can get hit quite easily. So that's what we did, and you just dropped those bombs and got the heck out of there. That was the general thing. If you had rockets or something like a bullpup missile, you had to stay. You know, you fired a missile and you had to guide it with a little joystick into a thing, so you had to hang in there. And you were not diving at the earth right there. You were just flying some sort of missile. So different kinds of things, different places.
Was your target acquisition all visual then at that time?
Yes. Yeah, mine was all visual. And so I got to learn
Day
to...
and night, you were on your own.
At night, well, if there's a moon, a lot of things go with, is there a moon? Is there an overcast? And frankly, because I got to know a slice of Vietnam very well, I knew where the river went, I knew where the road turned off, I knew where we thought they had some ammo dump or trucks in a park, and so you could pretty well know where it was. And you're not actually, if you're bombing a truck in the daytime, you're at 2 miles up. You can just barely see the truck. My aiming point was the back of the head of the driver. I had a very specific aiming point, but when I rolled in, I did not necessarily know whether it was a Ford or a GMC, you know. So all I'm saying is it's visual. For me, it was visual. I'll talk right now a little about the Iron Hand, which is against much of the war, and this war also had a lot of electronic warfare. And I could hear radars painting me. And different radars have different sounds. A search radar goes go, and then some of the fire control radars for anti-aircraft guns will go brrr. And then with a SAM, my car reminds me of it because it goes brrr, and then it goes brrr, brrr. That means it's on you. You are the target. And you say, well, visually, I just knew where all those SAM sites were generally. I didn't know which ones had live SAMs at any given time. But if I knew that there was one just north of Kep Air Base, that's just north of Hanoi, I knew where those sites were. And as an iron hander, I would first of all, what does the iron hand do? Well, you got 40 airplanes going to bomb something. There are 4 dummies high in the head who are the iron hand people. And so when that radar, when I hear the surface-to-air missile radar, I say, okay, he's up. Or the real trouble is they are up. You've got them here, 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 and here. You don't know which ones are really going to shoot you. But you know generally where they are. So I could go and launch my strike to kill them. That's going twice the speed of sound. The surface-to-air 2, it was a SAM-2 at that point, it's going twice the speed of sound. People say, gosh, couldn't you dodge those? Are you really good at dodging an arrow at 30 feet? No. Something is going 1,400 miles an hour. You barely see it, if at all. If you're back a ways, you can see them sometimes. You see them lift off, but once they start going, they are going very fast. If they're coming at you, they're going really fast. And so then, if you are in an A-4, we had deception in our aircraft, which basically took the radar picture for the gun sight or whatever it was, and it moved it away from my airplane. And then the other thing I did, to the extent I knew which surface-to-air missile was coming at me, I would do a high G barrel roll underneath, which keeps your energy up to some degree, but what you're doing is making that target go like this, and the faster you are, the better it is, because it deceives there are 2 guys in a SAM-2 system. One guy's vertical and one guy's horizontal, and they're on you. They got you in their X, and the idea is to keep you in the X, and then in theory, the SAM is, once it gets in your area, it will blow as it comes into your area and take you out, which unfortunately, I can tell you some of that happened. So that's what you did. And so you'd shoot those missiles and then get the hell out of there, so to speak. And then they would come, I'm told that at least once in my day, I had a surface-to-air missile. They thought it was a direct hit on me. I was upside down pulling about probably 4 to 5 Gs, and the SAM goes by my belly. Luckily, Russians had bad quality control. They were supposed to have a proximity fuse in the SAM-2. I'm one of the guys, I know an Air Force guy or two, who said, yeah, I had SAM go right by me. They weren't supposed to go right by you. That proximity fuse, which was ancient history, ancient technology at that time, supposed to work. I don't know whether they disabled them or what, but the proximity fuse didn't work. And I'm quite happy about that. Well, we're close to. Oh, this you may have wondered where I was. You've always heard about Vietnam. Right there's the DMZ. Where I was right here. And there's a real advantage, just like the Red Sea. You know, who's really bombing the Houthis? A carrier that's 100 miles offshore or so. And that's where we were. So I went in and I had a slice of Vietnam that I knew better than Jefferson County, right there, that I was going into. And then we'd have alpha strikes into Hanoi, into Haiphong. The alpha strikes are where you got 40 aircraft going to bomb something. So some of these things I'm talking about are individual deals, and others are big strikes, alpha strikes. Yeah, and some of you had something to do with this part. I did not. The only time I ever went down here, I'd have a hung bomb at night, and the carrier said, "We do not like you aboard our carrier." And they would send me down to Da Nang so that I would blow up on Da Nang, a Marine Corps air base, instead of on their nice ship, which is very reassuring because the bomb's still hanging out there on my wing. I don't know. It wasn't too reassuring for me, but oh, and then I did not do my regular carrier landing. I eased that baby out. The regular carrier landing, you set up a 3-degree glide slope and you crash on the fantail of the ship. And luckily, some of the time you'll have a hook that catches a wire, which is a big cable. It's called a wire. Okay, all right, moving right along. That's what they really look like in the daytime, and that's North Vietnam. And that's just a defect in my film. But often, you say, well, do you have pictures of all this? No, I didn't take pictures of a lot of this because within a millisecond I was dead. So I was not taking pictures much of much of this stuff. So you're kind of busy when you're actually at it. But after you pulled off, you might be stupid enough to turn around and take a picture of where you just bombed. That's probably what that was. A lot of places were bombed a lot, and these are usually transshipment points where they're bringing trucks down, going across. You got barges in here. You sometimes hit the barges and not. And every little supply area way in the back, you know, right there's where I just bombed, I guess. And that's what it looks like over beautiful downtown North Vietnam. And usually we try not to hit the villages. You know, usually the trouble is that sometimes the wind's the wrong way. And that is so sad. I mean, best pilots in the world, if you enter a dive and the wind's really different, then your bombs don't go where you thought they were going to go. And this is Coast Inn, North Vietnam, one of the Hot Tins here, and Vin is up there. I know some of these places kind of intimately. And then we talked about those nice sleek bombs. We had World War II bombs too that we'd get on here. Those were not sleek. And this is a bullpup missile, that one of those I told you we could guide. And then I'm just going to go through a couple of these. That's what happens if you have your bombs going, you've got a guy beside you. This is a Phantom. He's also dropping bombs, and this is on probably a Milky run, guided by some radar guy. Because otherwise, if you're in a dive, you're too busy to be taking pictures. Then you may wonder what a carrier looks like from 20,000 feet. There's home. That's what it looks like. It gets a little bigger as you get close, but and then returning to the ship, I'm going to rattle through these. You know, this is a flight of 3 coming in, and this is a Sea Sprite helicopter just sitting out there to pick you up when you went in the water. There he is. I just preempted that. This is what an A4 looks like. I got that picture reversed coming in, and that's what it is up close and personal. And you can see that once it's, first of all, it has these high gear. You may wonder why. Because the A4, my primary mission throughout the entire time was to deliver a hydrogen bomb somewhere. That was my primary mission, even though I'm talking about iron bombs and stuff. And so this was designed by Ed Heinemann to put a 2,000-pound shape, we just called them shapes, under here, and that would have been, and then we would have had fuel outboard to go someplace and bomb. That was our primary mission. We'd stand down right in the middle of doing all this Vietnam War and practice delivering a hydrogen bomb somewhere. 70 times Hiroshima.
You're actually talking about a nuclear hydrogen bomb?
Hydrogen bomb, nuclear bomb. Nuclear bomb, that was my primary mission. Wherever I was in the world, within about 1,000 miles, I was going to go and obliterate, not a city, but a region. 10 megaton. That was my primary mission. Old Navy attack pilots at that time had that primary mission. And that's why the gear are pretty high, because you got to put a 2,000-pound atomic or hydrogen bomb under there. That's why it was designed that way. This is a fuel tank, far friendlier. That's an A6 one, and he got too close to the guy ahead or something. He's going around. And you can see the A6, it was a great airplane in many ways. It looked like a DC-3. And you'd think, well, that's not very good. It had 2 engines like my 1 engine. And it carried twice as many bombs. But it was a great airplane. 2 people in that airplane. I mentioned Red McDaniel was the pilot. Kelly Patterson was his BN when he was shot down. We never heard from Kelly Patterson again. He was on the ground with a broken leg. Never heard from him in 60 years. And that's a Phantom coming in. You can tell it's a Phantom because it smokes. You can see him from about 50 miles away. And there's an old tanker coming in. And this is my roommate, Jerry Hausman. 37 millimeter blew out the whole right side of his wing, and so he could stand up through it. And you can see Ed Heinemann did do a good job of putting enough structure in there to keep it up. But that's what a direct hit looks like. And Jerry brought it back. I happened to be duty officer down in the ready room. And they say, well, Hausman's coming back with a hole in the wing. Well, that was kind of not remarkable. We got holes in our wing a lot, and that meant leaked fuel. He comes in, he's on a tanker because he's running out of gas because it's leaking out of his wing. He's on a tanker pulls away, he lands, and we had the old video goes down on him. We saw this hole, and we said, holy, that's a hole in the wing, you know. It basically hollowed out that little wing on the right side, and he brought it back. And we said, geez, Jerry, that's really great. What'd you do? He said, I just pulled like hell. You know. So the airplane held together. And then I made this 71,000th landing or something aboard the carrier. You get a cake. And that was when I was just a little younger, and this good second-class cook, I was glad to see him coming down there. We got a little cake in that ready room that day. This is my squadron. You'll see it on these patches here. This is my new XO, who became our CO, and this is Tippi Hedren and Skip Wright. She'd come out to the ship a little before that, so we had some happier times. And that's what I looked like just a couple of years ago. And if you don't have any good looking shorts like that, you ain't nobody. And this is Skip Wright, and he's Annapolis class of '63, and this is our little home right back here in Cuby Point, which is in Subic Bay, Philippines.
I say I look familiar.
Yeah. I can go on about Cuby Point quite a lot. John and I can talk, but this is basically, we were nuclear. The Japanese didn't like us much. I'll get to that in a minute. But because we were nuclear, so mainly we went to Cuby Point or Hong Kong for our rest and recreation. I think I'll get to it right now. I had to do with picking up guys that got shot down. Well, Skip, unfortunately, was my wingman one day. They rotated through. He was senior to me, but they rotated leads for things like road reconnaissance. 3 airplanes, we went and looked for trucks and stuff on the road. We had alternate targets. Skip was my wingman. He's the only wingman I ever had shot down off my wing. You're not supposed to do that to your wingman, but he came off the beach. He had 0 oil pressure, which is not good in a jet engine or any other engine. And eventually, all of a sudden, I'm flying. Well, you give the lead to the guy that's got a problem with his airplane. So we actually headed him for the Ranger, not the Enterprise, because it was the closest carrier. All of a sudden, the back of the airplane turned brown. And I went, whoa, it's going to blow. And we said, eject, eject. And so Skip ejected, and you can see he weighs about 100 pounds. Took him an hour and a half to come down. And the biggest crisis was we had 2 helicopters coming to rescue, and so I had to come up on guard to say, you know, helicopters coming to the rescue, break it off. You got 2 of you in the same place. Because I didn't need a midair right over Skip. He'd already had a bad day. Actually, he made it back to the ship before I did. You know, helicopter got back there. He was fine. But if you send, I know somebody going to Annapolis next month, and he'll be. Skip was a sailor, you know, a real sailor, and. So if you go to Annapolis now, you'll see the Skip Wright sailing club area, because he's got that at Annapolis. And here's a squadron a little later. Unfortunately, we've lost a couple guys by then, which is what happened in those days. And before long, he took over as squadron skipper. This is our new XO. Skipper was hit directly by a SAM over just east of Hanoi. Blew out of the sky. So, and the rest of them, almost all the junior officers here got hit. I got going through that, I said, well, he got hit here, he got hit here, he had to punch out there, you know, and so forth. It turned out I was the only guy of that vintage of pilot that came in that did not get hit. I was using Gardol. That was had a special protective shield around my teeth, I think, and that's why I didn't get hit. But these guys are all great guys. I mean, and which ones made admiral? Annapolis, he was also a great stickman. He was a great pilot. And our NAVCAD, Maslowski. Naval Aviation Cadet, he came up through the ranks. He was probably aboard a submarine, and then transitioned over to be a Naval Aviation Cadet. I've got to go on a little bit. How old does he look he would be? 16 maybe? Whenever President Johnson came out to the ship off to San Diego, and so you have to have one of your airplane all polished up and somebody standing in front of it. So the skipper put ski up there, and President Johnson comes along, oh, son, geez, going off on your first cruise, huh? No, sir, third. Then I told you that was the end of the first cruise. Then second cruise, January 1968, never go in the north anything in the winter.
For sure.
Remember I mentioned that the Enterprise, 80,000 tons, even heavier when it was fully loaded. North Pacific, all these airplanes are triple chained down. Everything has triple chains on them. My airplanes are right here. I'm the aircraft division officer. They have those nice little red things covering up the front. Green water went through my jet engines, as in, usually that you saw how high the flight deck was aboard the water. This flight deck went underwater, and my airplanes got immersed in salt water. So we knew we had a little bit of a project coming up when we got to better ports. Don't go in the North Atlantic or the North Pacific in the wintertime. It's just not a wise thing to do. So there we are. You always wonder, if you heard where I was in the Navy, you know, well, you get to go where Mother Nature is mean. And then we're heading for Southeast Asia, right? Not so. We come out of Sasebo, Japan, where the students from Tokyo came down and protested us, being the first time a nuclear ship had been in Japan, January 1968. And so we're coming out, hey, let's go to Southeast Asia. Not so fast. North Koreans took the Pueblo, one of our intelligence ships off in the Sea of Japan, right here. And so we turned north. And we had no cold weather gear. I think old chiefs had cold weather gear. Everybody else was ready to go with their flimsy summer stuff. So they were taking shirts. Temperature was basically freezing. Overcast was about 200 feet to 40,000. And this, of course, is one of those friendly trawlers out there watching us as we were around. And this is a guy on the flight deck trying to keep from freezing to death. That's when we got to wear that poopy suit thing I was telling you about. Well, wait a minute. And so they took the Pueblo. I got to go a little bit of a story there. So we turn, and we're the only, this terrible storm had come through, wiped out all the Air Force bases in South Korea and up across Japan. And so it turns out the USS Enterprise is the only thing that's got 80 airplanes ready to go. And so if you ever are coming into a bad time in your life, you go, oh, I am now dead. I was going to be number 2 conventional and number 4 nuclear. You know, it's a great honor. Well, my skipper had made me his wingman. So we're going to do basically about a 40 aircraft strike on Wonsan and into Pyongyang, North Korea. Temperature of the water, how cold is salt water when it isn't frozen yet? And so I mentioned that not a friendly place. And if you have to punch out over, there's no worse bunch of people to have you than the North Koreans. They are mean mamas. So that was not a good time for some of us. We were thinking, you know, I've been shot at and so forth, but this is worse than that. So I was going to go. Luckily, the admiral, his staff, I talked to people later, they had to talk him out of that for 16 hours. He was going to have us attack. At that time, we didn't know where the Pueblo was for sure. It had gone into Wonsan, which is a well-known port, but we didn't really know where the crew was. We weren't going to do much except maybe bomb the ship, which would have been good because they've still got it in North Korea as a museum right now. But that wouldn't have done much. It turned out that the crew, except for one guy who was killed by the North Koreans when they took the ship, they got out, what, 18 months later, a few months later. So it worked out that the admiral's staff talked him out of us going to war. We were far better prepared to go nuke than we were conventional at that time, just the load we had aboard the ship. We were always ready to go nuke, wherever. And, you know, those of us who had that job in our youth, you know, we still don't talk about where we were going specifically. But if you take the USS Enterprise and do 1,000 miles around, you've about figured out. You say, well, geez, if we're going to deliver a nuclear bomb, how would that work? Well, we weren't exactly planning to come back, I guess is the short way to say it. So that's what you do when you're a Navy pilot. And this is what you do if you're the Pueblo and get caught. And then I'm back over the north again, sprinkling a little good cheer here and there. And this is my last look at North Vietnam. A lovely day, as you can see. I've got to go back. You see those clouds? That makes it harder to bomb things. Those are actually friendly cumulus. My first mission, I'm going to get back to that. I'm number 4. This is my first mission ever, back when. The squadron commander for the other squadron has got a wingman, and then I've got a lead, and I'm number 4. And we're going to go and we're going to bomb some target. Weather's terrible, of course. That's how the weather always is. And so we then are going to go to our alternate target. And the skipper, Commander Bennett, turns and goes, and we go to a different place in North Vietnam. And I'm number 4. I'm tail end Charlie. And he's obviously doesn't know where the target is. and he says, my call sign was champion. And he says, Champ 1, do you have the target? That's my lead. Negative. Then he goes to his wingman, who's well senior to me. Do you have the target? Negative. Last chance. Well, Champ 2, do you have the target? Affirmative. Champ 2, you have the lead. So my first bombing mission in North Vietnam, I had the lead of a 4-plane, which is okay. And then I had a terrible run, too steep, too fast, screwed up run. But they did know where the target was after I pointed it out. So you never know if you're the junior guy, the private who just showed up yesterday. You might end up being in the lead. Kind of one of those things. Okay, so that was my last look at Vietnam, 1968, and then I went on to the Corsair II. You can tell this is nowhere near as svelte an airplane as my, and these are enemy aircraft of some sort. I can't remember what those are. No, that's I was an instructor pilot in the A-7 for a couple of years, and all the models of the A-7, which was a very good bomber, terrible air-to-air airplane, just not good. And so you wonder, well, that's what the Griffiths Air Force Base, Rome, New York, I think. That was the closest place to my old home, so I flew up there for some reason. And that's what I looked like just a couple of years ago. And then you may have heard the Navy told me, I said, geez, I need a wife, don't I? They said, look, if you needed a wife, the Navy would have issued you one. So, just a couple years later, I was issued my wife, and so that's how that. Actually, her story is, I was going to Naval Justice School, which led me astray into the practice of law for 45 years. I was going to Naval Justice School in Newport, Rhode Island, and we were complaining. I have to try to keep my language a little cleaner. We were complaining. Some of us had been out and about in the Navy. Now we have to go to Naval Justice School. I was on my way to be an instructor, and we were complaining. That's the word. As we're coming into the closed mess, and all of a sudden we look up and there are about 24 freshly commissioned wave officers. We said, well, this may not be so bad. Her story is, she said, boy, get over here and sit down right here. That's probably how it worked. And then I thought I was going to have a lot of fun wandering around Boston or wherever from Newport. And the people running the Naval Justice School had no sense of humor. We had an exam and all 5 courses every Monday. That ruins it was a great course. I learned a whole lot, but they just had no sense of humor. But that's how you end up if you're a good guy and don't get killed. You have possibilities. Yes, sir.
Was your justice school to be the legal officer in the next squadron?
Yes.
I went through that also, and that's what determined me not to go into law.
In the Navy, in the Air Force, if you're a pilot, you're in operations. In the Navy, I was enlisted personnel officer, I was aircraft division officer, and then, before going to the replacement air group, I went to VA 174 replacement air group, and I tried to get back to the East Coast, Cecil Field, Jacksonville, Florida. And we had about 1,200 screw-ups that we had in the squadron. We ingested A-4 squadrons and exhaled A-7 squadrons. And so I had a lot of experience. you know, some people went off with their Naval Justice School, never did anything in the law. I had a lot going on. If you have people being creative about what they did, I always said our young sailors would go off on the weekends and kill themselves by driving badly, spelunking underwater and stuff, so forth. So I got a lot of experience. Courts-martial, about almost 100 administrative discharges, a lot of stuff going on. So, and then I figured out, well, maybe I could do this. And my wife said, do you really want to, what do you do as an attack pilot? I said, well, you go and you go to war, and then you come back and you get ready to go to war, and then you go to war. She says, this is a good idea. She was a Navy junior. Her dad was a retired Navy commander. So she knew about that, but she thought that being an attack pilot was really a bad idea. So she said, what about the practice of law? So we decided, and then we went to the world famous seaport of Denver to go to the University of Denver Law School. So, yeah, in the Navy, a lot of guys got to be legal officers. Almost nobody liked it because you're working with, you do get to work with the skipper, who's a Navy captain, and the XO, who's a Navy commander or so. And so you get a little different perspective, but you still got guys who make mistakes. Now, luckily, the Navy has a non-judicial punishments thing, which is a really good idea. Because you take a 19-year-old, they are bound to screw up one way or another. But if you just could, you know, give them a slight punishment, and then if they made it through and re-enlisted, it got erased from their record. So non-judicial punishment. Then I got out in the real world here in Denver, and they get a court record for being a young punk screw-up, you know, which just doesn't make any sense. You got to have something a little bit more flexible. And the good old skipper, I should tell you, XO at that point was Marv Reynolds, who had been a great instructor of mine out on the West Coast. And he had this old thing, it was called something, what was the oldest system of military justice? Something like the Rocks and Shoals. And the second class is coming up, and he screwed up bad. He said, you know, Jones, you know, he's putting this old, I'll just call it the manual of court-martial. He's clapping it in his hand in front of this guy. What? You know, that would not go over today, I suppose. But what he was doing is saying, please straighten up. You know, I'm gonna take a stripe away from you, but straighten up, and you've got a chance to make it in the big wide world, which I think he did. So, you know, a lot of those things. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to say, I found that in the Navy, once you get that, as a JG is when I went through justice school, and I was a legal officer, saw a lot of captain's mask, which is non-judicial punishment. But it followed me for the rest of my 24-year career because they knew I had that. So if a summary court came up, I was the one that was tagged. A JAG investigation, I was the one they always tapped. Couldn't get rid of it.
No, and I always wondered, why the heck did I get sent from my combat squadron to Naval Justice School before I went to the replacement air group? I had made the mistake of taking a correspondence course, UCMJ, which is the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That's why. Yeah. The detailer, the guy who sends you to your next thing, said, Tobey took that course. He must really be interested in the legal.
There you go.
That's how it goes. Yes, sir.
Hey, Gary, you mentioned your flight mate who was shot down, had a broken leg and things like that. I've always wondered, why can't we come up with a better ejection system? Is it just that you're so shoehorned into that close space? Because you read a book like Honor Bound and the folks that ended up in the Hanoi Hilton, why can't you, is it just the physics don't allow and they're glad just to get you out of the airplane in whatever condition? But it seems like so many people that have to eject get out with broken forearms, broken legs.
No, it is a great system. 500 knots. If you put your hand out the window at 500 knots, you know what happens to your hand?
Yeah.
It goes away.
Yeah.
And it's just broken off and flopping. So John McCain, somebody else I knew well, he came out, remember I told you you're 500 knots, you just released your bomb. And so he ejected, and then his airplane goes wobbly. So he ejects. He's lucky to be alive. In the old days, if that's a Stuka, he's dead, period. So he punches out. Yeah, he's got broken arms and legs, but actually, Kelly Patterson, he broke his leg when he hit the ground. I mean, if you're in a parachute, you know, a lot of bad things can happen when you hit the ground. No, all of us, in my ejection seat, the Rapex seat, it was a jet. The earlier ejection seats were a 40-millimeter round under your butt. Right. And that really shortened your spine bad. And some of us have ridden in Martin Baker seats and some other seats. And I think the Phantom still had the Martin Baker, as I recall. That tended to hurt you as it ejected you because it was too violent. The later ones are, and they were also 0-0. You could actually eject without forward velocity. Original ejection seats, you had to have forward velocity to make it a longer ride. And so, but it gave a somewhat gentler impact. But the answer is a lot of violent physics going on. A lot of violent physics, no doubt about it.
You're just happy that they're able to get you out and.
Absolutely. Well, no, it wasn't.
And you still have a chance.
Oh yeah, I mean, it really, it improved over the years, and it really was it is a good deal. I'll bet you that seat isn't much different today in the Hornets than I had.
Well, Gary,
it basically could get you out.
We're kind of out of time now,
Yeah,
but you probably have, and I apologize, but we probably have time for one or two more questions. And then afterwards, if folks would like to come up and maybe have individual conversation, would you be willing to entertain
Sure.
that, Gary? Okay. On behalf of the museum, though, real quickly, I would like to present Gary with one of our challenge coins and a big thank you for coming and talking.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Some great stories here. Couple other questions.
Everybody about the front lawn.
Yes, out on the front lawn, we do have, once again, we ask you to stop by some of those tables. And there is some pizza, I think, out there now, too. So you may want to get on top of that. Also, real quickly, is there a Mr. Riggin in the audience today? Mr. Riggin? No Mr. Riggin. Okay. All right. No problem. I was supposed to keep an eye out for this individual. But, Gary, any more questions for Gary real quick?
I just want to point out to Gary that, I don't know if you've met Nellie. Nellie, raise your hand. Nellie was on the Coral Sea as a bombardier navigator, a couple cruises.
Nellie's the guy I identify with. He knows a lot. And I should get back. I'm sorry, another question?
I just had a question. You know, in the Army, we didn't leave the wire with less than 20 soldiers. When you're getting into that single-seat aircraft, did you ever look over and see the pair of Phantom pilots getting in there and say, I wish Ed, and again, I wish...
No, I didn't want to be there with him. No, I mean, think about it. The guy gets sick if he was flying with me, you know. No, it's... that takes a little adjustment. All the airplanes, the A-4 and the A-7, the first time I ever flew them, I was solo. You know, you've been in a simulator, bad simulators, not good simulators like they have today. Now, the other thing I was going to get back to at the end of my cruise, remember I mentioned I helped get Skip Wright out of the water? Well, if you're in the middle of things, and I was kind of in the midst of it, timing-wise, I think, I had 4 different times where I helped rescue guys in the water or in the land. I won't go through a couple of them. Well, I will too, because Top Gun, the origin of Top Gun, I'm in there, innocently bombing some roads or something, and a MiG comes after me. And my air traffic controller says, hey, get out of there. And so in come 2 Phantoms to save me, smoking in as they come. And I'm going out to the water. You know, whenever you were in distress or worried about things, you got out to the water. Well, then I hear some radio chatter, and all of a sudden, and I'm circling to kind of support whoever's in there. The airplane's coming out on fire. It's not a MiG. It's one of the F-4s. Dan Pedersen's squadron was among those. At that point, both the Air Force and the Navy's Phantoms thought they were going to shoot things down at long range with a Sparrow missile. Didn't work. MiG pilots didn't want to die that way, so they do evasive maneuvers. And so Dan and some others, he was a relatively junior officer, a lieutenant commander. He goes back and says, we got to learn how to fight our airplane. It has tremendous thrust. We got to figure out what to do. And all of us who did air-to-air maneuvering went vertical a lot, but it made a difference if you had thrust or power. And so they came back and they figured it out. We went from a 2-to-1 kill ratio in the 1968, I'll just call it 1968, to 17-to-1 in the 1972. So we really enhanced our air-to-air capability. The last one I'll go is a Phantom was shot down. If you're in an attack aircraft, you might be called on to do search and rescue combat air patrol. What this means is you start your engine up and you sit out there on the deck. They launch the whole bunch, and then if anybody gets shot down, you're the go. So almost at the end of all my cruise, I'm sitting SARCAP, and all of a sudden they say, the big voice on the one MC comes up and says, launch the red cap. You know, you go, okay. So I went off, and Phantom had been shot down, 2 pilots out. Sam took them out right in the middle of North Vietnam, middle of the night, 0200 is probably when I was sitting there. And so I go in, and this helicopter pilot comes in that little Sea Sprite, which is not a long-range aircraft, comes in, and I just happened to know my best friend had been shot down right there. And so I knew that that area was bad for anti-aircraft. And I'm looking at a little tiny chart in my little tiny knee pad. But I knew that. So I had the helicopter dogleg around the place where the anti-aircraft was, into the middle of North Vietnam. Crazy pilot goes in. All I'm doing is listening. You can't see much. We put flares on. Eventually, the flares went out. They still haven't picked up the 2 Phantom guys. These are just call signs in the night. You know, who knows who's really there. But he goes in, you know, and he says, okay. The last thing, there were several chapters before this. After you could hear his rotors hitting the trees. That's not a good sign, you know, when he's. Well, helicopters, when you key the mic on a helicopter, it's kind of jumbled anyway. But he keys the mic, and you can hear him taking hits, and you can hear his M60s chattering at the enemy, and then he hits the trees, and you can imagine my reaction. You know, I thought, oh no. But then he recovers, and then all the flares go out, and he says, I'm turning on my lights, get down here to this spot where he'd been trying to get to land. He lands, 2 guys jump aboard, they get out, they land aboard a destroyer which steamed in at flank speed right off the coast of North Vietnam with about 5 minutes of gas. And he did get the Medal of Honor.
Wow.
So, just a quiet day, you know, in the life of an attack pilot.
Thank you again, Gary. And yes, I do welcome you if you'd like to come up here if you have some extra questions for Gary. Otherwise, again, out in front, some great supportive services out there. Check out.
I wanted to share a different application of the A4D with